Anyone who has felt that sting understands the sudden, hollow drop in the stomach when realizing they are sitting alone in a crowded room, the subject of whispered pity. There she was, Olive Evans, staring at a lukewarm glass of Pinot Noir while her date's empty chair mocked her. She thought the worst thing that could happen that night was a bruised ego and a wasted outfit. She was dead wrong, because just as the waiter approached with a sympathetic smile to take away the unused plates, a man cloaked in shadows and expensive cologne slid into the empty seat. He didn't ask. He just locked eyes with her, eyes that looked centuries old, and purred his loss. Olive thought she was being rescued by a charming stranger. She didn't know she was being claimed by a monster. The ambient lighting at La Toussie in the West Village was designed to be flattering, casting a warm, golden glow over the expensive pasta and the people eating it. But at that moment, it felt like an interrogation spotlight. Olive checked her phone for the 7th time in 10 minutes. The screen glared back at her with the same infuriating message from Richard Hoyer, a mid-level investment banker she'd met on a dating app 3 weeks prior. Emergency at the firm. Closing a deal. So sorry. Have to bail. Make it up to you. He had sent it 45 minutes after their reservation time. She had already ordered a $25 glass of wine and broken off a piece of the complimentary focaccia. The humiliation was a physical weight on her chest. She could feel the eyes of the couple at the next table sliding over to her, their voices dropping a decibel. The waiter, a young guy with a neatly trimmed beard whose name tag read David, approached her table with a practiced expression of polite neutrality that barely concealed his pity. "Will we still be waiting for your guest, miss, or would you like to hear the specials?" he asked, reaching out to clear the untouched silverware across from her. Olive opened her mouth, the words, "Just the check, please," forming on her tongue, ready to retreat to her apartment on 84th Street and drown her sorrows in reality television. But before the words could escape her lips, a hand clamped down on the back of the empty chair. The hand was pale, the fingers long and elegant, adorned with a heavy, antique silver ring on the index finger. "She won't be needing the check, David," a voice rumbled. It was a voice that commanded immediate obedience, smooth as velvet, but laced with an undeniable, heavy authority. "And we won't be needing the menus. We will have the chef's tasting menu, and bring a bottle of the 98 Barolo." David the waiter blinked, his professional composure faltering as he looked at the man who had just smoothly slid into Richard's empty seat. Olive stared, too stunned to speak. The stranger was, without exaggeration, the most arresting human being she had ever seen. He possessed a sharp, aristocratic bone structure, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline shadowed by dark, meticulously styled hair. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her annual rent, paired with a midnight blue silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were an impossible shade of dark, glittering obsidian, reflecting the candlelight but absorbing all the warmth in the room. He didn't look at the waiter. He looked entirely, consumedly, at Olive. "His loss," the stranger said, his lips curling into a devastating, knowing smile. David scrambled away to fetch the wine, leaving her completely alone with this intruder. The sheer audacity of the act momentarily overrode her embarrassment. "Excuse me," Olive finally managed to say, her voice trembling slightly, though whether from indignation or the sudden, electric tension radiating from him, she couldn't be sure. "Who are you? You can't just sit here." "I am someone who detests seeing a beautiful woman abandoned in a place like this," he replied easily, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the crisp white tablecloth. "And clearly I can sit here. I am already seated. My name is Lysander. Lysander Croft." "Olive Evans," she said instinctively, instantly regretting giving him her full name. "Look, Lysander, this is a very expensive restaurant. I'm not looking for a pity dinner, and I certainly don't know you." "Pity is for the weak, Olive," Lysander said softly, tasting her name on his tongue as if it were a rare delicacy. "There is no pity here, only an opportunity. Your companion, Richard, was it, is a fool who prefers the sterile glow of spreadsheets to the warmth of living, breathing art. I simply capitalized on his gross miscalculation. A chill ran down her spine. How do you know his name? Lysander's smile didn't waver, but his dark eyes seemed to flash. I overheard you whispering to the hostess when you arrived. You have a very distinct voice. Melodic. Like a cello. It was a plausible excuse, but the way he said it made the hairs on her arms stand up. The waiter returned, pouring the Barolo with trembling hands. Lysander didn't taste it. He simply waved David away. He picked up his glass, holding it by the stem, and raised it toward her. To serendipity, he toasted. Against her better judgment, Olive picked up her glass. The wine was rich, complex, and tasted like dark fruit and earth. As she drank, she couldn't tear her gaze away from him. He had a stillness about him that was unnerving. While other patrons fidgeted, checked their phones, or gestured wildly as they spoke, Lysander sat perfectly, preternaturally still. Only his eyes moved, tracking her every micro-expression. Over the next 2 hours, La Toussie faded into the background. The incredible food, truffle pasta, braised short ribs, scallops, passed her lips, but her senses were entirely monopolized by Lysander. He was a brilliant conversationalist, shifting effortlessly from Renaissance art to modern geopolitics. Yet he spoke of history with a bizarre, intimate familiarity. When she mentioned a recent exhibit on the Romanovs she'd seen at the museum, he critiqued the curator's understanding of Nicholas II's personality, as if he had personally shared tea with the Tsar. "You speak as if you were there," Olive laughed, the wine loosening her anxiety. Lysander's smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. "I am a voracious reader, Olive, and I have an excellent memory." As dinner wound down, Olive realized she hadn't thought about Richard Hoyer once, but a creeping realization began to set in. Lysander hadn't eaten a single bite of the extravagant tasting menu he had ordered. He had only sipped his wine, his gaze endlessly devouring her instead. "You didn't eat," she pointed out, gesturing to his full plates that the busboys had quietly cleared away course after course. "I have a very specific diet," Lysander murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "I rarely dine in public. I prefer to consume my meals in private." There was a heavy, suffocating implication in his words that she couldn't decipher. It thrilled and terrified her simultaneously. When they stepped out onto the sidewalk of West 4th Street, the crisp October air hit her like a splash of cold water, sobering her up instantly. The streets were slick with fresh rain, reflecting the street lamps and neon signs. "Let me arrange a car for you," Lysander offered, pulling a sleek, dark phone from his pocket. "No, thank you," Olive said quickly. "I live fairly close to the subway, and I like the walk. It clears my head." "Then I will walk you to the station," he stated. It wasn't a request. They walked side by side. He moved with a silent, fluid grace that seemed at odds with the busy, chaotic energy of New York City. He didn't sidestep puddles. He seemed to glide over them. As they turned down a quieter, dimly lit stretch of Bleecker Street, the comfortable bubble of their dinner conversation began to thin, replaced by a dense, palpable tension. "You work in publishing," Lysander said suddenly, breaking the silence. Olive stopped walking and turned to him. "I didn't tell you that." He paused, stepping into the halo of a flickering streetlight. The shadows caught the sharp angles of his face, making him look pale, almost statuesque. "You mentioned your office is near Bryant Park. You have ink stains on the side of your left index finger, and you possess a romantic idealism that only comes from spending too much time buried in fiction." It was a simple deduction. She rubbed her finger instinctively. He was right about the ink, but the deduction felt too intimate, too invasive. "Are you a detective, Lysander?" "I am many things." He stepped closer, the scent of his cologne, amber, smoke, and something metallic, wrapping around her. "But primarily, I am a collector. I find rare, beautiful things, and I ensure they are preserved." Before she could ask what he meant by that, a harsh voice shattered the quiet of the street. "Hey, both of you, wallets, phones, watches, now." They spun around. 2 men had stepped out from the narrow alleyway between a closed bakery and a brownstone. They wore dark hoodies, their faces obscured. One of them, the taller one, was pointing a dull, black handgun directly at Olive's chest. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Panic flared, hot and blinding. She fumbled for her purse, her hands shaking violently. Okay, just take it. Olive, stop. Lysander's voice wasn't raised, but it carried a terrifying, icy weight. He stepped in front of her, shielding her body with his own. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't reach for his wallet. He just stood there, staring at the man with the gun. "Are you deaf, rich boy?" the mugger snarled, stepping forward, waving the weapon. "I'll blow a hole right through you." What happened next defied the laws of physics. 1 second, Lysander was standing 2 feet in front of her. The very next fraction of a second, he was gone. There was no blur of motion, no sound of running footsteps. He simply vanished from her line of sight and reappeared directly in front of the gunman. The mugger didn't even have time to gasp. Lysander's hand lashed out, moving with the speed of a striking viper. He gripped the man's wrist. Olive heard a loud, sickening crack that echoed down the quiet street, followed by an agonizing, wet scream. The gun clattered uselessly to the pavement. The second mugger lunged forward with a switchblade. Lysander didn't even turn his head. He merely sidestepped the clumsy attack with impossible elegance, grabbed the man by the throat with one hand, and lifted him completely off the ground. The man gagged, his legs kicking violently in the air. Lysander held a grown man suspended in the air with a single arm, as easily as if he were holding a winter coat. "You have made a grave error," Lysander whispered. His voice was no longer human. It sounded like grinding stones, ancient and full of malice. In the dim light, his obsidian eyes seemed to catch the ambient red glow of a nearby neon sign, flashing a brilliant, terrifying crimson. "Lysander, stop!" Olive shrieked, her voice tearing through the air. "You're going to kill him!" Lysander froze. Slowly the crimson faded from his eyes, replaced by the dark, endless black. He looked back at her, his expression softening instantly into something resembling contrition. He opened his hand, letting the man drop to the asphalt like a sack of dead weight. The 2 muggers scrambled backward like terrified animals, dragging each other away, tripping over their own feet to flee into the darkness. Lysander turned to Olive, adjusting his cuffs. He wasn't breathing heavily. His suit wasn't even wrinkled. "My apologies, Olive," he said smoothly, picking up his umbrella from where he had apparently dropped it. "The streets of this city have grown far too brazen. Are you unharmed?" She stared at him, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. How did you do that?" "You moved." "I didn't even see you move. You lifted him with one hand." "Adrenaline is a powerful thing," Lysander said, his tone deliberately soothing, though his eyes remained watchful. "And I have trained in martial arts for many years. Come, let us get you home. I insist on a car now." She was too in shock to argue. A sleek black town car seemed to materialize out of nowhere at the end of the block a minute later. The ride to her apartment was silent. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize what she had just seen. Adrenaline, she repeated to herself. It was just adrenaline. But deep down, a primal, ancient part of her brain was screaming at her that the man sitting beside her in the leather seat was an apex predator. When the car pulled up to her building, Lysander walked her to the front door. He didn't try to come inside. He took her trembling hand, bringing her knuckles to his lips for a brief, freezing kiss. His skin was unnaturally cold. "Sleep well, Olive," he murmured. "I assure you we will see each other again." Olive locked 3 deadbolts behind her that night, and she didn't sleep a wink. By Wednesday, Olive had managed to convince herself that she had exaggerated the events of the alleyway in her head. Trauma and fear played tricks on the mind. Lysander Croft was just a wealthy, intense, highly trained eccentric. That was the narrative she clung to as she sat at her desk at the publishing house in Midtown. Her best friend and co-worker, Sarah, wasn't helping her paranoia. "So let me get this straight," Sarah said, perched on the edge of Olive's desk, stirring her iced coffee. "Richard the Rat ditches you, and a billionaire Bruce Wayne type swoops in, buys you $1,000 dinner, goes full John Wick on 2 muggers, and drops you off without even asking for your number." "That's the gist of it," Olive mumbled, proofreading a manuscript for the 4th time without registering a single word. Olive, men like that don't just exist by accident. Did you Google him? Of course I did, she sighed, spinning her chair to face Sarah. Nothing. Not a LinkedIn, not a Forbes article, no social media. It's like he doesn't exist on paper. Maybe he's old money. Like, really old money. Illuminati old, Sarah joked, standing up as their editor walked past. Well, if Mr. Mysterious comes back, you better get his ring size. But honestly, I'd still be checking my locks. At precisely 1 p.m., the receptionist buzzed Olive's phone. Olive? There's a delivery for you at the front desk. You might need help carrying it. Olive frowned, walking out to the sleek, glass-walled reception area. Sitting on the marble counter wasn't a bouquet of flowers. It was an antique, brass-bound wooden chest. A courier dropped it off, the receptionist said, her eyes wide. He looked like a butler from an old movie. Olive unlatched the heavy brass lock with trembling fingers. Inside, resting on a bed of crimson velvet, was a pristine, leather-bound book. She lifted it carefully. It was a true first edition of Wuthering Heights, a book she had briefly mentioned loving during her dinner with Lysander. Resting on the cover was a thick, cream-coloured card with her name written in elegant, flowing calligraphy. For the romantic idealist, may the pages offer you better company than Richard. Yours, Elsie. Holy hell, Sarah whispered, having followed her out. Do you know how much a true first edition of Wuthering Heights costs? Olive, this is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Olive slammed the chest shut, her heart hammering. This wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a terrifying display of power and surveillance. He had listened, he had remembered, and he had tracked down her workplace without her ever telling him where it was. That evening, Olive left work early. The city felt different. The shadows between the skyscrapers felt deeper, more menacing. She felt eyes on her the entire subway ride home. She practically ran from the station to her apartment building. As she fumbled with her keys at her door, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, dragging her into the dim alcove beside her apartment. She screamed into the hand, thrashing wildly, visions of the alleyway muggers flashing through her mind. Olive! Olive, stop! It's me! A frantic, pathetic voice hissed. The hand pulled away, and she spun around, raising her heavy tote bag to strike. She froze. It was Richard, but he looked completely destroyed. He was wearing the same suit he had worn on the night of their date, but it was ruined, stained, torn, and wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot and darting around the hallway like a hunted animal. He smelled of sweat and sheer terror. Richard, what the hell is wrong with you? Are you out of your mind grabbing me like that? She yelled, her anger quickly overriding her shock. Shh, keep your voice down, he begged, pressing himself against the wall, peering down the empty hallway. He might be listening. They're always listening. Who? What are you talking about? She demanded, crossing her arms. And where the hell have you been since you ditched me at La Toussaint? Richard grabbed her shoulders, his grip painfully tight. Olive, you have to listen to me. I didn't ditch you. I swear to God I didn't ditch you. I was sitting there, waiting for you to arrive. I went to the restroom to wash my hands. He swallowed hard, tears welling in his frantic eyes. Someone was in there. I couldn't see his face. Just his eyes. Black eyes. He looked at me, Olive, and my brain just stopped working. It was like I was trapped in my own body. He told me to take out my phone. He told me what to text you. And then he told me to walk out the back door and not stop walking until the sun came up. A cold dread pooled in her stomach. The air in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard, you're crazy. You're making excuses. I walked to Brooklyn, Olive. Richard sobbed, his composure completely shattering. I couldn't stop. My feet were bleeding. I was crying, but my body wouldn't obey me. He put a compulsion on me. A compulsion. Olive, the man who took my seat, the man I know sat with you. He isn't human. Stop it, she whispered, stepping back from him, clutching her Wuthering Heights chest tightly to her chest. You have to get out of the city, Richard pleaded, stepping toward her again. "He told me before I left. He told me the king has found his new queen, and her blood smells like salvation. Olive, he's a—" Richard never finished his sentence. The hallway lights flickered violently and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. A rush of freezing wind tore through the enclosed corridor, bringing with it the heavy scent of amber and smoke. Olive heard a sickening thump, followed by the unmistakable sound of tearing fabric and a wet, gurgling gasp. "Richard!" she screamed, backing away until her spine hit her apartment door. The lights slammed back on. She was alone in the hallway. Richard was gone. The only evidence he had ever been there was a single, perfect drop of crimson blood resting on the polished hardwood floor directly where he had stood. And standing at the far end of the hallway, leaning casually against the elevator doors, was Lysander Croft. He was impeccably dressed in a black velvet blazer, adjusting his silver ring with slow, deliberate movements. He looked up, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers with a possessive, terrifying hunger. "As I said, Olive," Lysander murmured, his smooth voice carrying perfectly down the empty hall. "His loss." Her hands shook so violently that the Wuthering Heights chest slipped from her grasp, hitting the floorboards of her apartment with a heavy, hollow thud. She had scrambled backward, thrown her weight against the solid oak door, and engaged the deadbolts, the chain, and the secondary slide lock in a matter of seconds. Outside in the hallway, there was only silence. No footsteps retreating towards the elevator. No sound of the heavy metal doors sliding open. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers slipping on the glass screen as she dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, crisp and bored. My name is Olive Evans. I live at 345 East 84th Street, apartment 4B. There was an attack in my hallway. A man, my date, Richard Hoyer, was just taken. He was terrified, and then the lights went out and there was blood. Ma'am, slow down, the operator interrupted. Are you currently in danger? Is the attacker inside your residence? No, I'm locked inside. But the man who took him is still out there. His name is Lysander Croft. He's— Her voice hitched. How could she say it? He's a vampire. He moved faster than sound. He compelled a Wall Street banker to walk to Brooklyn. The police would dispatch a psychiatric unit, not a patrol car. He's dangerous. Please send someone. Units are en route to your location. Stay on the line. 10 excruciating minutes later, heavy fists pounded on her door, accompanied by the muffled shout of NYPD. She peered through the peephole. 2 uniformed officers, their badges glinting in the restored hallway lights, stood looking annoyed. Olive undid the locks and threw the door open. He was right there, she pointed to the spot where Richard had stood, and the blood was— Her voice died in her throat. The polished hardwood floor was immaculate. The single drop of crimson blood was gone. Not wiped away, not smeared. Completely absent. The air smelled of cheap hallway air freshener and old dust. The scent of amber and smoke had vanished. "Ma'am?" The taller officer, whose name tag read Gallagher, looked at her skeptically. "We checked the lobby, the stairwells, and the roof access. Building Super says the security cameras on this floor have been down for maintenance since Tuesday. There's no sign of a struggle, and no blood." "He was here," she insisted, her voice cracking. "Richard Hoyer, you can track his phone. You can check the cameras across the street." "We ran the name Lysander Croft through the database while we were coming up," the second officer chimed in, consulting a small notepad. "Mr. Croft is the principal owner of Croft Holdings, which actually acquired this building's management company 3 months ago. He has a pristine record, ma'am. High-profile philanthropist. Are you sure you didn't just have a bad fight with your boyfriend? He owns the building." The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. The officers took her statement with barely concealed condescension, advised her to take a sleep aid, and left. Olive locked the door again, slid down the wood paneling, and pulled her knees to her chest. She wasn't just being stalked. She was being hunted by someone who owned the very walls she lived within. The next morning, the city felt like a foreign landscape. The bright morning sun filtering through her blinds felt like a lie. She took the subway to the publishing house in Midtown, jumping at every sudden movement, analysing every tall man in a dark coat. When she arrived at her desk, Sarah was already there, but she wasn't her usual bouncy self. She was staring blankly at her computer monitor. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Olive asked, dropping her bag onto a chair. She turned to her, her face pale. "Olive, did you read the company-wide email that just went out?" "No, I just walked in." "Why?" She pointed a trembling finger at her screen. Olive leaned over. The email was from the CEO of their boutique publishing firm. Subject: Exciting new horizons for pen and press publishing. Dear team, I am thrilled to announce that as of 8 a.m. this morning, Pen and Press has been fully acquired by the media division of Croft Holdings. This acquisition will bring unparalleled resources. The blood drained from Olive's face. "Croft Holdings," Sarah whispered, looking up at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Olive, isn't that the name of the guy from the restaurant?" Before she could answer, her desk phone rang. It was a sharp, grating sound that cut through the low hum of the office. She stared at it. The caller ID simply read, "Executive Office." Her hand shook as she picked up the receiver. "Hello?" "Good morning, Olive." Lysander's velvet voice purred into her ear. The sound sent a jagged spike of pure terror down her spine. "I trust the transition of your employment is to your liking. I thought it best to streamline our professional paths." "Where is Richard?" she demanded, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What did you do to him?" "Richard is currently settling a very old, very heavy debt," Lysander replied smoothly. "He is alive, if that is your concern. But he is no longer your concern. You, on the other hand, are exclusively my concern. There is a charity gala tonight at the Pierre Hotel, an exclusive affair. I have taken the liberty of having a dress sent to your apartment. You will wear it, and my driver will collect you at 8. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she spat, gripping the phone cord so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You're insane! You're a monster!" A low, vibrating chuckle echoed down the line. It didn't sound human. "Oh, Olive, you have such fire. It is exactly why I chose you. But let us be clear, you do not have a choice. If you are not in the car at 8, I will personally visit Sarah's apartment in Astoria. I understand she has a very sweet golden retriever. It would be a shame if anything unfortunate happened while she was walking him." The line went dead. Olive slowly placed the receiver back on the cradle. He wasn't just a monster. He was a monster who understood exactly how the human world worked, and he had checkmated her before she even knew they were playing a game. The dress waiting in Olive's apartment was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk, cut on the bias to cling to every curve with a daringly low back. It fit as if it had been sewn directly onto her body. There was no brand label, only a tiny LC, embroidered in silver thread on the inside hem. She looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't look like an editor from an independent publishing house. She looked like a dark, glamorous captive. A trophy. She wasn't completely helpless, though. She had spent years editing survivalist memoirs and true crime thrillers. If this man, this creature, wanted to play games, she wasn't going to just sit and wait for the slaughter. She went into her kitchen and took the sharpest ceramic paring knife she owned, wrapping the blade in a thick layer of duct tape so she wouldn't cut herself, and slid it into the hidden pocket of the velvet clutch he had provided. It was a pathetic weapon against a man who could shatter bone with 2 fingers, but it grounded her. At exactly 8 o'clock, the intercom buzzed. The ride to the Pierre Hotel on the Upper East Side was suffocatingly quiet. The driver, a massive man with a neck like a tree trunk and eyes entirely devoid of expression, didn't say a word. When she stepped into the grand ballroom, the sheer opulence of the event washed over her. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting rainbows of light over New York's elite. Mayors, tech billionaires, and famous actors milled about, holding flutes of Dom Perignon. And standing at the top of the grand staircase, waiting for her, was Lysander. He wore a bespoke tuxedo that made the other billionaires in the room look like they were wearing rented polyester. The moment she entered, his obsidian eyes locked onto hers, and the rest of the room seemed to blur into insignificance. He descended the stairs with that same impossible, liquid grace, holding his hand out to her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Sarah's safety was anchored in her mind. Olive placed her hand in his. His skin was, as always, freezing cold. "You are a vision, Olive," he murmured, pulling her close. Too close. She could feel the hard, statuesque lines of his chest against hers. "The colour suits you perfectly." "Where is Richard?" she asked immediately, keeping her voice low. Lysander sighed, a patronizing sound, always so concerned for the unworthy. "Come, let us walk." He guided her through the crowd. Olive noticed a horrifying detail. As Lysander passed, the wealthy, powerful humans instinctively parted for him. They bowed their heads slightly, averting their eyes. The mayor of New York literally stepped backward to give him a wide berth, a nervous sweat beading on his forehead. Lysander wasn't just rich. He ruled these people. He led her to a private balcony overlooking Central Park. The air was crisp, the city lights glittering beyond the dark expanse of the trees. He closed the heavy glass doors behind them, muting the jazz band playing inside. "You asked about Richard," Lysander said, turning to the railing and looking out over the park. "You believe him to be a victim. A poor, innocent man who was frightened away from a date. You are terribly naive, my dear." Olive bristled. "He was terrified of you. He said you put a compulsion on him." "I did," Lysander admitted freely, without a shred of remorse. "Because Richard Hoyer is a parasite. 3 months ago, he borrowed $5 million from a shadow bank I control to cover a horrific loss in his trading portfolio. He gambled with money he did not have. And he lost." Olive stared at him, her mind spinning. "So you're a loan shark on top of being a... whatever you are." Lysander turned to her, his eyes flashing with a sudden intense heat. "I am a king, Olive, and I collect debts. When Richard could not pay, he came to me begging for his life. He offered me assets, properties, information." Lysander took a step closer, crowding her against the stone railing. "And then he offered me you." Her breath hitched. "What?" "He met you on that ridiculous application," Lysander continued, his voice dripping with disgust. "He noticed your lineage. Your mother's maiden name was Belmont, was it not?" Olive's heart stopped. Her mother had died when she was 7. She was a Belmont from a very old, very reclusive family in upstate New York. She never spoke of her. "The Belmonts," Lysander whispered, reaching out to trace the line of her jaw with a freezing finger. She shuddered, but couldn't pull away. "A bloodline that has been a thorn in the side of my kind for 5 centuries. Hunters, fanatics. But you are the last of them. And your blood." He leaned in, burying his face in the crook of her neck. She could feel the sharp, agonizing points of his teeth pressing just barely against her pulse point. "Your blood smells like the sweetest vintage ever created. It is intoxicating. It is karmic justice." He pulled back, his eyes completely black. "Richard offered me the last Belmont to clear his debt. He was supposed to bring you to me at the restaurant. I merely decided to expedite the process and remove the middleman." The betrayal was a physical, sickening wave. Richard hadn't been an innocent date. He was a traitor who had sold her to a monster to save his own skin. "So what now?" she demanded, her hand slowly creeping towards the slit in her clutch, her fingers grazing the taped handle of the ceramic knife. "You drink from me? You kill me to settle a 500-year-old grudge?" Lysander laughed, a dark, rich sound that vibrated through the balcony. "Kill you? Oh, Olive, you misunderstand completely." He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a small, black velvet box. He snapped it open. Inside rested a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a massive, blood-red ruby, surrounded by black diamonds, set in antique platinum. "I have lived for 800 years, Lysander said softly, his tone shifting from predatory to something dangerously close to reverence. "I have seen empires rise and fall to ash. I have grown unspeakably bored with the frailty of humans. But you are different. You did not break when I took over your life. You did not cower when you saw what I am in the alleyway. You are a fighter, Olive Evans. He took the ring from the box. I don't want to kill you. I want to turn you. I want the last Belmont to be my queen. I want to spend eternity watching the fire in your eyes. Olive stared at the ruby. It looked like a drop of coagulated blood. He wasn't offering her death. He was offering her an eternal, gilded cage. And if I refuse, she asked, her grip tightening on the knife inside her purse. Lysander's smile vanished. The aristocratic charm evaporated, leaving only the ancient apex predator beneath. I am not asking, Olive, he whispered, his voice sounding like cracking ice. You are mine. The only choice you have is whether you walk to the throne or whether I drag you to it. Lysander's fingers wrapped around her wrist. The cold radiating from his skin burned like dry ice. He was no longer the charming aristocrat from Lartusi. The mask had completely slipped, revealing the ancient, terrifying predator beneath. His grip was a vice of solid steel, slowly dragging her hand towards the ruby ring. You will wear it, Olive, he commanded, his voice a hypnotic, vibrating hum that made her vision blur at the edges. You will surrender. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He saw her bloodline as a trophy, a vintage to be consumed. He didn't realize that a legacy of hunting isn't just in the blood. It's in the instincts. And he certainly didn't know that for the past 3 years, Olive had been the lead editor for a series of best-selling, highly technical survivalist and tactical engineering manuals. She spent 40 hours a week fact-checking improvised munitions, evasion tactics, and urban warfare survival. She was terrified, yes, but she was not helpless. As he pulled her closer, his obsidian eyes entirely focused on her face, her free hand slipped into the velvet clutch. Her fingers bypassed the taped handle of the ceramic paring knife. Instead, they wrapped around a small, cylindrical object. It was a military-grade tactical flashlight, a sample sent to her office by a survival gear company. But she hadn't left its stock. Following a schematic from Chapter 4 of their latest release, The Urban Evader, she had bypassed the internal voltage regulator and swapped the standard LED for a high-intensity, shortwave, ultraviolet bulb. I am not a prize to be won, Lysander, she whispered, letting her body go entirely limp, feigning surrender. He smiled, a terrifying flash of white fangs. Good girl. Now. Olive ripped the flashlight from the clutch, shoved the bezel directly against his left eye, and slammed her thumb onto the activation switch. A blinding, violet-white beam erupted point-blank into his face. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Lysander let out a sound she would never forget. A high-pitched, unearthly shriek that vibrated the glass doors behind them. His grip on her wrist vanished as his hands flew to his face. The skin around his eye immediately began to sizzle, releasing a foul wisp of smoke that smelled of burning ozone and rotting meat. She didn't hesitate. She dropped the flashlight, grabbed the ceramic knife from her purse, and drove it with all her strength right into the center of his chest. It didn't hit his heart. It deflected off a rib, sinking deep into the muscle. Ceramic doesn't trigger metal detectors, but more importantly, it doesn't conduct the dark, unnatural energy that animated him. It just caused raw, agonizing tissue damage. Lysander staggered backward, crashing into the stone railing of the balcony, clutching the hilt of the small knife. The ruby ring clattered uselessly to the marble floor. You little bitch, he roared, his voice demonic, echoing into the night. His left eye was squeezed shut, the skin around it violently blistered. Olive turned and bolted. She didn't go back through the glass doors into the ballroom. He would slaughter the entire room of oblivious elites to get to her. Instead, she vaulted over the low, decorative partition, dividing the balconies, and sprinted toward the emergency fire escape attached to the hotel's brick exterior. Her midnight blue silk dress tore at the thigh as she swung her legs over the iron railing. She kicked off her high heels, letting them plummet into the darkness below, and began to descend the rusted metal stairs in her bare feet. The cold steel bit into her soles, but adrenaline flooded her system, drowning out the pain. She hit the pavement of the service alley on 61st Street and ran. The air was frigid, the asphalt punishing. But she didn't stop. She crossed Fifth Avenue, dodging a blaring yellow taxi, and plunged headfirst into the dense, dark tree line of Central Park. The shadows of the trees swallowed her whole. This was his domain now. The dark. But she had a head start, and she had a plan. She needed the ramble. It was a labyrinth of winding paths, dense underbrush, and rocky outcroppings. As she tore through the brush, her mind raced, assembling fragments of memory. Her mother's voice, hushed and urgent in their old farmhouse upstate before she died. They are arrogant, Olive. They rely on their speed and their senses. Take away their senses, and they are just dead weight. Olive stopped behind a massive oak tree, gasping for air, her chest burning. She reached into a torn dress pocket. She had one more trick from the survivalist manuals, a spool of high-tensile Kevlar micro-wire. It was thinner than fishing line and strong enough to slice through bone if pulled tight. She quickly tied one end to the sturdy base of a cast-iron lamppost and stretched it across the narrow paved pathway at neck height, securing it to an adjacent tree. It was an old guerrilla tactic, invisible in the dark, deadly to anything moving fast. The forest was dead silent. No crickets, no wind. Then she heard it, a slow, rhythmic clapping. "Bravo, Olive!" Lysander's voice drifted through the trees. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the rocks. He wasn't running. He was strolling. A Belmont through and through. The ultraviolet trick was inspired. It will take hours for my retina to heal. You have actually managed to draw my blood. She pressed herself flat against the rough bark of the oak tree, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "But you cannot outrun me," he purred, the sound closer now. "You are barefoot, bleeding and exhausted. I am eternal. This park is my garden." He was stepping onto the pathway, right toward the wire. She held her breath. Thwack! A violent gasp tore through the air, followed by the heavy, sickening thud of a body hitting the pavement. She peered around the trunk. Lysander was on his knees, clutching his throat. The Kevlar wire had caught him perfectly. Because he was moving, the momentum had driven the wire deep into his neck. Dark, viscous blood poured between his fingers, staining his pristine white shirt. He wasn't decapitated, but the vocal cords and arteries were severely compromised. Olive stepped out from behind the tree. He looked up at her, his remaining good eye burning with a mixture of absolute fury and, bizarrely, profound respect. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a wet, gurgling sound emerged. "You talk too much, Lysander," she said, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. But her victory was violently cut short. A sharp, desperate sob broke the silence from the heavy brush to her right. "Olive, help me, please!" Olive spun around, emerging from the shadows, illuminated only by the pale moonlight filtering through the canopy, was Richard Hoyer. But he wasn't alone. Standing behind him was the massive, silent driver from the town car. The brute had a fistful of Richard's hair, forcing the terrified banker to his knees. Richard's expensive suit was shredded, his face bruised and streaked with tears. He made me watch," Richard blubbered, locking eyes with her. "He told his driver to bring me here to watch him turn you. Olive, please, you have to save me. We can go to the police together." She stared at the man who had abandoned her at the restaurant, the man who had traded her life to a vampire king to save his own miserable existence. Lysander, still clutching his bleeding throat, let out a raspy, choking laugh. He gestured weakly to Richard, then to her, a cruel, mocking challenge in his eyes. He was offering her a choice: surrender to save the man who betrayed her, or run and let Richard be slaughtered. The standoff in the heart of the ramble was agonizingly still. The only sounds were Richard's pathetic, ragged breathing and the wet dripping of Lysander's blood onto the asphalt. "Please, Olive," Richard begged, reaching a trembling hand toward her. I was terrified. "You don't know what he can do to your mind. I didn't want to give you to him. I swear, I'll pay you back. I have money in offshore accounts. I'll give you everything." Olive looked at Richard. She looked at the dark circles under his eyes, the pathetic slump of his shoulders. A week ago, she would have felt pity. She would have sacrificed herself to save him, driven by that naive romantic idealism Lysander had mocked. But the woman who sat alone at La Toussie was dead. She had been burned away by ultraviolet light and cold terror. What stood in her place was a Belmont. "You owe him $5 million, Richard," she said, her voice eerily calm, cutting through the crisp night air. Richard blinked, confused. What? "You owe him $5 million because you gambled with money you didn't have," she continued, taking a slow step forward. "And when the debt came due, you didn't offer him your car or your apartment. You offered him a woman you met on the internet 3 weeks ago. You sold my life to buy your own." "I was under compulsion," Richard shrieked, struggling against the driver's iron grip. "He compelled you to leave the restaurant," she corrected him, glancing at Lysander. The Vampire King was still on his knees, watching her intently, his throat slowly, unnervingly beginning to knit back together. "He didn't compel you to make the deal in the first place. You did that all on your own." She turned her full attention back to Lysander. The wound on his neck had stopped bleeding. He slowly removed his hands, revealing a thick, jagged red scar that was already fading. The Kevlar trap had bought her time, but it hadn't stopped him. He pushed himself to his feet, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over the pathway. He didn't move toward her. He just waited, his obsidian eyes burning with dark curiosity. He wanted to see what she would do. "You said you are a collector of debts, Lysander," she called out to him, standing her ground. Lysander inclined his head slightly, a silent confirmation. "And you said my bloodline is a thorn in your side, that claiming me would be karmic justice." She took a deep breath. "But you're a businessman. You understand the rules of leverage." She reached into the torn pocket of her dress. She pulled out her phone. The screen cast a harsh blue light on her face. "While your driver was busy bringing Richard here," she said, her thumb hovering over the screen, "I wasn't just running blindly through the park. I accessed the remote servers of Pen and Press Publishing, the servers your company just acquired." Lysander's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You see, your corporate takeover was very sloppy. You rushed it to trap me," she explained, the adrenaline crystallizing into pure, cold focus. "In your haste, the network integration was left entirely unsecured. I just spent the last 10 minutes transferring every single internal communication, every shadow ledger, and every encrypted client list from Croft Holdings onto a secure, dead man's switch server." She tapped the screen once. "If I don't enter a passcode every 12 hours, all of it, the identities of your thralls, the shell corporations funding your empire, the bribes to the mayor and the police commissioners, all of it automatically blasts to every major news outlet, the FBI and Interpol. You might be eternal, Lysander, but your bank accounts, your properties, and your quiet life in the shadows, I can burn them to ash by breakfast." Silence stretched over the park, heavy and absolute. Richard looked back and forth between them, entirely lost. The massive driver looked at Lysander, waiting for an order. Lysander Croft, the 800-year-old Vampire King, stared at her. For a long, terrifying moment, Olive thought he was going to lunge. She thought he would simply rip her head off and take his chances with the exposure. But then the corners of his mouth twitched. The twitch grew into a slow, devastating smile. And then he threw his head back and genuinely laughed. It wasn't the cruel, mocking sound from the balcony. It was a rich, booming laugh of genuine delight. "Magnificent," Lysander whispered, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. He stopped 3 feet away, respecting the boundary. "Utterly, breathlessly magnificent. You didn't just fight back, Olive. You changed the rules of the entire game." He looked at her, not as a predator looks at prey, but as a king looks at a rival monarch. "You have checkmated me," he conceded, bowing his head in a gesture of profound respect. "The files remain yours. Your life remains yours." He turned his gaze to Richard, and the warmth instantly vanished from his face, replaced by absolute zero. "But the debt," Lysander purred, stepping toward the weeping banker. "The debt still remains." "No!" Richard screamed. Olive! Please, you can't let him! Olive looked at Richard. She felt nothing but a cold, heavy emptiness. He had made his bed. His loss, she said softly, echoing the very words Lysander had used when he first slid into the empty seat at La Toussaint. Lysander's eyes flared with dark amusement at the callback. He gave her one final, lingering look. "Until our paths cross again, Miss Evans," Lysander murmured. "And they will." He gave a sharp nod to his driver. The brute hauled Richard up by his hair and dragged the screaming, kicking man deep into the darkness of the ramble. Lysander turned, his velvet coat swishing in the night air, and followed them into the shadows, vanishing as silently as smoke. Olive stood alone on the pathway. The first grey light of dawn was just beginning to break over the Manhattan skyline, piercing through the trees. She was barefoot, freezing, and bleeding. Her dress was ruined. Her career was fundamentally altered. But as she walked out of Central Park and hailed a cab in the early morning light, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt the Wuthering Heights chest waiting in her apartment. She felt the dead man's switch pulsing on the server. She had walked into a dinner date expecting romance, and she had walked out having waged a war against the king of the New York underworld. And she had won. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but they've clearly never met a woman who just realized her blind date sold her to an ancient vampire to cover his gambling debts. The shadows of New York City will never look the same to Olive Evans again. But Lysander Croft learned a very valuable lesson. Never underestimate a woman with a survivalist handbook and nothing left to lose. She was the last of the Belmonts. This was her city now, and she made the rules. If this story of surviving the dark and claiming one's own power kept you on the edge of your seat, don't just scroll past. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more twisted tales of modern monsters, karmic justice, and the sheer willpower it takes to fight back. Stay safe out there, and always check your blind spots.